Hi, everybody. I'm Gwen Eiffel, and welcome to the Washington Week Webcast Extra, where we pick up where we left off on the weekly broadcast. I'm joined around the table by Joan Biskupic of Reuters, Carrie Johnson of NPR, Indira Lakshmanan of Bloomberg News, and Doyle McManus of the Los Angeles Times. During the regular broadcast, we touched lightly on a topic that's been consuming us for weeks: Ukraine. The U.S. stepped up its pledge to punish Russia for intervening, but with 40,000 Russian troops on the border and far fewer NATO forces prepared to counter, the end of this standoff appears no closer. So, Joel, what are the options that are on the table now?
There really aren't a whole lot of new options that are there, and the circumstances on the ground are not very promising. You'll recall there was that about a week ago, that agreement in Geneva in which everybody...
Feels like a month ago, but we were just talking about that a week ago.
Everybody on paper agreed to back off, that people who were occupying buildings they shouldn't have been occupying were supposed to quietly go away. Well, the pro-Russian rebels supported, organized, incited by Russia, if you believe the Obama administration and the Ukrainians, didn't fold up their tents and go away. The Russians, for their part, kind of upped the ante, upped their demands and said the first thing that has to happen is that all of the peaceful demonstrators in downtown Kiev have to go away. And then Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, essentially escalated the rhetoric some more and said, all of these clashes that are going on in eastern Ukraine, they're organized by the Americans.
Well, Indira, everybody here at least assumes that Vladimir Putin has a hand in all of this, and this back and forth, it's your fault, fault almost matters not at all, as long as he is the one who physically has the troops in position. So does the administration have any idea about how to deal with him other than stepping up and saying, it's going to come soon, we're going to sanction you any minute. We're going to hurt you.
We do know, we got confirmed today that as early as Monday, we expect on Monday, that both the European Union and the United States will move forward with a new set of sanctions. And these ones are expected to be a lot more painful than the previous sanctions we saw. These are ones that are going to hit, we have information, probably Gazprom Bank, which is a very significant bank, and VEB, some significant state-affiliated banks in Russia. And what that's going to do, it's going to raise a lot of problems for Russia, because it's going to raise the cost of doing business with Russia in general, because American and European banks aren't going to want to do business with other banks because they might get sanctioned. So capital flight, I thought it was fascinating that Russia's own figures showed that in the first quarter of this year, Russia has had worse capital flight than in all of last year. And last year was a record year for capital flight for them. The cost of borrowing has really skyrocketed for the Russians. So they're already feeling it. Now, the DOD has confirmed that there have already been incursions by the Russians into Ukrainian airspace over the last 24 hours, several of them. So I think we can't rule out that Putin is going to go forward with some form of invasion despite these threats.
Well, if Putin's idea is this historic need to reclaim Ukraine, why would just a little economic pain be enough to deter him?
Well, you raise a very good point that, it's possible that what we've got is maybe not enough to stop him. Eventually we could make him really hurt by cutting off all credit card networks for Russia. We could cut off U.S. banking access for all of Russia. We could make it really painful ultimately. But it's true that maybe this whole approach doesn't work.
Well, and in the short run, actually, his popularity in Russia has gone way up. So he's actually had a political gain. But yeah, over time, if the sanctions continue, it may not be just a little economic pain. There's an interesting hint of some debate there, because last week the Russian finance minister came out and officially lowered his growth rate from 2.5% for the year to, he said, it may just hit 0. They may end up in a recession. So this may change.
They may actually have. Carrie, I want to talk to you about a story you wrote about this week. It's another story that's making its way through the courts and may end up at the Supreme Court about prosecutorial misconduct.
Yeah, Gwen, all these years after the Justice Department had to back away from the conviction of the late Senator Ted Stevens on corruption charges because of the failure to share evidence with the defense, these challenges based on prosecutorial misconduct keep on bubbling up. So this case this week involves a guy who was convicted of possessing ricin with the intent to use it as a weapon, presumably against wife, girlfriend, mistress. It turned out the scientific expert in his case had a history of misconduct that was allegedly not properly disclosed to the defense team, so they couldn't use it to cross-examine the scientist on the stand. They're now asking the Supreme Court to take this case and draw a clear line and send a message about prosecutors hiding evidence that could be favorable to the defense. It's not clear that the High Court is going to take this case, but I can tell you that I was at an event earlier this week where prosecutorial misconduct was discussed ad infinitum. Somebody said there have been 15 convictions reversed since the Ted Stevens case based on the failure to share information. So this is a persistent problem, and the Justice Department hadn't got its arms around it yet.
Fascinating. Joan, I wanted you to elaborate a little bit on some of the stuff we touched on during the broadcast. Two things. This was just one day at the court this week, which was kind of remarkable. Arguments on area, which we touched on in the broadcast, but I want to ask you one more thing about that, which is, it seems to me that there were a lot of heavy hitters in that room. Every broadcast outlet was involved in it, and they were all going up against this one little idea, which is that people can bounce past the networks and get their programming. Is that basically what we're talking about here?
Yes, but Aereo itself had a heavy hitter, so it's been cast in some ways by Aereo as
David and Goliath.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
With, which would be appealing, but there's
more to Barry Diller and
yes,
was it Paul Clement?
Yeah. Well, Paul Clement's on the other side representing the broadcasters.
Right.
But the truth is there are a lot of other interests here beyond just the broadcasters and this one startup. It's because they have to look at cloud services. And the justices themselves were concerned about how they're going to rule in a way that might affect cloud computing. And the idea that that they're in unfamiliar waters right now, and they want they wanted some reassurance from both sides about how narrowly they could go, because there's so much money. There is so much money involved in this. This was the big money case, and there were pictures from right after this hearing of these lawyers walking down the wonderful marble steps of the court, and it's just suit after suit after suit at like $2,000 an hour kind of thing, and you could just really feel that in the room, and also just the reverberations that a decision is going to have. And the justices themselves from the bench talked about how can we write this and possibly write it narrowly enough not to affect technologies we don't even know about.
I want to ask you something else you're in a unique position to elaborate on. When Justice Sotomayor read her dissent in the affirmative action case from the bench, you're putting the finishing touches on a book about her right now. That was highly unusual, not only for a junior justice, but obviously the first Hispanic justice, but also so early in the term. And her words, the language she used was very, very tough, basically saying, if it is about race, how can you say it's not about race? I mean, really pushing back hard on the idea that this was only about the legality of who gets to decide.
Right, the ballot box, essentially, which is the way the majority framed it. Every term, one or two justices will dissent from the bench. But she's been there nearly 5 years, and she has never done it. She's said, sometimes it seems like it's overly dramatic. And she's been there during other affirmative action cases, immigration cases, voting rights cases, and she's never written separately. So this was a very big deal. And you're right, Gwen, the dissent that she wrote, the 58-page dissent, had a lot of really personal language in there about people being stigmatized by the color of their skin, people on the margins, as we know well from things that she has said in her speeches and in her own memoir, that she was a beneficiary of affirmative action at Princeton and then at Yale Law School. And she has talked outside of the courtroom a lot about how it needs to continue. And this was the first time we heard her voice saying it in a legal way, that it needs to continue. And she went on for 12 minutes, and it was...
Which is an eternity at the court.
It is, and it was a really big deal, because, of course, now the room is packed, because this was the day of the big Aereo case being heard, and actually there was another big case being heard. So the room was packed. She had a really full audience for this, and it was quite a moment.
Well, thank you, Joan. Thank you for always being there for us, and thank you everybody else as well. You can stay online and check out the rest of what our panelists are reporting and writing about, and we'll see you next time on the Washington Week Webcast Extra.